So I'm sure you recognize that we read a whole lot of readings before we read the gospel, which is why we were sitting down. That was the entire book of Philemon. Some of you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. Philemon, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Ringo, but I don't know about Philemon. Philemon is definitely one of the books of the Bible. It's a really small book, and because it's so small, I thought, hey, we should read it all. And that is what it would have looked like about 2,000 years ago when Christians got together. They would have just read the letters of Paul. And that was one of the letters of Paul to this guy, Philemon. And he was talking about another friend of his, Onesimus, who came to go and visit Paul. Now, Paul was in prison in Rome. And this guy comes up, Onesimus, and he's a runaway slave. And the letter was written by Paul, given to Onesimus, to go back to Philemon to be a slave. That's what Paul said to Onesimus. Go be a slave. Can you imagine? That was the message that Paul sent with Onesimus to go back to Philemon and be a slave. That was his cross. Paul recognized that the way that Onesimus was going to be able to carry his cross for Christ was to be a slave. He had run away and he had to go back. So whenever you're sitting there and the cable goes out because there's a hurricane, that's not your cross to bear. No. When you're trying to cross the Buckman and you just can't stand it and you're about to pull your hair out, that is not your cross to bear. When your pillow is expired and you have to sleep on it anyway, did you know pillows expire? Yeah, found that out this week. Pillows expire. If you're sleeping on an expired pillow, not your cross. That's something else. Carrying a cross means being a disciple. It means following Jesus. That takes real effort. That takes real energy. That usually entails some kind of a sacrifice. You have to give something up, usually to follow Jesus, because the other thing that you might want, they don't mesh. So you have to focus and be completely and entirely consumed with that effort of being a disciple. But it comes with great reward. You see, if you're a disciple, then you understand the meaning of life. Right? Everybody wants to understand the meaning of life. Well, there it is. The meaning of life, if you're a disciple, you know that the meaning is Jesus. And all your actions and all your wants and all your desires and everything focus on that one thing. So you have happiness. You ever wonder how people could do something and they say, oh, do what? I didn't do anything. It's because they're a disciple. It's because the thing that they want, they see, they're willing to go and they're willing to do. Whether that be playing an instrument or being an Olympic swimmer, those efforts, those energies, all of that is put forward so that in the end they might have what is theirs. And so while they're going about it, there's a happiness because they know the meaning for the things which they do. So we call them satisfied. That's what I call them. They're satisfied. They have the things. There's also personal growth because they know where they're trying to get to. So they can work on themselves and they can structure their life so that the things that they're doing in their life, they're achieving, they're making steps towards. That personal growth is that achievement on a cellular level of one's individual being is very satisfying. And the other part is if you know who you are, what your mission is, then you know where you belong in the world. You don't need anybody to tell you where you belong in the world. You don't need somebody to confirm your value in the world. You know your value in the world. So someone who follows Jesus, who is a disciple of Jesus, is satisfied. They grow personally, and they belong. This is a wonderful way to live. I think it is somehow that we decide that we're going to go chase after things, and we know what it is that we want, and so we go, and it ends up being that chasing after stuff leads us away from Jesus instead of towards Jesus. And Jesus admitted this. He said, look, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to give up all of your possessions. Now, what do I mean by possessions? I mean possessions. I mean things that you would think of, your normal possessions, luxuries, cars, houses, boats, clothes, toys, what have you. But I also mean power. I also mean prestige. What I mean by possessions is if you have something, anything, and it can be taken away from you, that's a possession. And if you have this possession and it can be taken away from you, and that's where you derive your satisfaction, your meaning, then you're in a bad place if you lose that stuff. If the thing that makes you you is your car, and then someone stole your car, then your very identity has been stolen. And Jesus says, he said, look, if you decide that you're going to do these things, you're going to not get anywhere. If you're building towers instead of out of lumber or bricks or steel, if you're building towers out of ambition and drive and persistence, and you get these towers and you think, I have created for myself opportunity, I've built an empire, then you should be aware that political atmospheres change, that positions get cut, that houses and cars and toys and clothes and all of these other things that we fill our life with can be taken away. And when they get taken away, you're left with nothing. And if these nothings are the things that you build your life on, you should pray right now that you don't enter the time of trial, that you never enter into a position where you might be attacked, where some spiritual, evil, malignant force might come into your world, or some thief might rob you in the middle of the night and take away the things that you have built your tower on, because your foundation will fall. And then you'll say to yourself, why me? And Jesus will say, well, you should have given it away anyway. We think so often that we're in control of our own happiness, that we can affect our own happiness. But the reality is, until you give everything away, you don't realize how truly weak and dependent you are. We are all so incredibly weak. We have no power or control over anything. If a hurricane coming over you didn't remind you of that, let me do it again. There are things that we take for granted. I just had an article from Kelly she sent me this week. What happens if all of a sudden you decide you're going to go to bed, and then the government decides to break into your house and take you or your wife or your kids and throw you into some prison, who knows where? They don't tell you where. They don't tell you why they took you, and they don't give you any other recourse for justice. They just throw you and make you sit. You possess justice. You didn't even know it. What a blessing this world is, this America is, that we just take for granted that we will have justice, that our court systems will act in such a way. If you call the police and you say, help, someone's robbing me, they're taking my TV out the front door, and the police officer comes and they go, oh, there's someone in the back stealing your stuff. You go, yeah, go get him. And then he goes into your garage and takes your car and drives off because he knows you're busy, you can't stop him. What a beautiful thing that if you call the fire department and your garage is on fire, they don't ask you to pay them right there. Hey, you know what, I'm not putting anything out until I see cash in my hands. What about my taxes? Yeah, what about your taxes? What about my hand? What a wonderful thing that we live in this world where everything is so beautifully set up. You don't have to worry about your shelters, where you're going to sleep. I was talking to Joe. If it really went down, we were having a conversation. He made sure that our schools were set up to receive us. That if our houses were destroyed and we didn't have somewhere to go, we had somewhere to go. Food. We have all these beautiful systems that we take for granted, that we have as possessions. How often do you eat simply because of the time? Yeah, when I wrote this, I was fasting. I was looking at the time a lot. What Christ is saying when he says give away the possessions is he's driving at the very heart of what it is our beings are. And he says if you remove all of these networks, if you remove all of these choices, all of these things you have, all of your family, all of your friends, what you will realize is how important Jesus is. If you give away everything you have, you won't be able to help but pray. You will learn real quick how to pray if you're starving and you don't have anywhere to sleep. And if someone comes up to you and they say, hey, I know where there's a shelter, you will immediately recognize the blessing that you have. If somebody says, here's some food, immediately you will know, God is here. Thank God I don't have to starve. Jesus said, give up everything you have. Because if it's taken away from you, you'll fight to get it back. He said, give up everything you have, because if you don't have it, then you'll want it, and you'll keep craving it. And it isn't really something that you had that you gave up. He said, give up everything you have, because that is where you will find me. Now, right now, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of pastors who read this exact same verse that I read this week, and they're preaching sermons on metaphors about how when Jesus said, "Give up everything you have," he was being metaphorical. He is not. He's being literal. And I've been there. And I've given up everything I had. And I come from a well-to-do suburban paradise like the one we live in. And I gave my car. And I guess I kept clothes. I did keep some clothes. I was going to a place where there was winter, so I needed clothes. But where I went, I had no expectation of justice. And I didn't even speak the language, something else you have, communication. They don't even realize. And I went, and from a church, I got some food, a roll, and I got some water, a little bottle of water. And I saw a guy, and he was sitting on the dirt side of a building, and he wasn't looking good. He had his foot was wrapped up, and you know when you wrap something up and you get so much blood and pus and it comes out, and it needs to be changed, but he wasn't in an environment where he could go and get bandages. So I had the only thing I had, and I gave him some of it, the roll and the water, and I shared it with him because I know what it was to starve, and I wanted to make sure that he had something. And as we're sitting there, he reaches in the bag and he pulls out a rotten tomato. And if you've ever seen a rotten tomato, you know the one side it gets kind of orangey white, and it's hard, and it has that sickening sweet smell, and it's overly wet. Why is it so wet, you know? And this is what he shared with me, because that was the only food that he had. And we're sitting on the ground in the dirt, and I'm watching good people walk by and look at me and this guy like the stuff you step in on the bottom of your shoe. Like I was hurting them by existing. And they're looking at me, and I know immediately the look. I'm the outcast. We're the outcast. We don't belong here. And I'm watching them walk by. And I realize it dawns on me that these good people who are doing good things, they're just going to the grocery store to get the groceries, or the school to pick up the kids, or the place to visit somebody who's in the hospital. They're doing the good stuff. I'm watching them walk by, and I'm realizing that they are the evil in the world. Because I was the problem in their world. I was the outcast, and I was the problem, and they just wanted me to be gone. They had decided that the things in their life were so important, and I, the one who needed help, was the problem because I was stopping them from whatever it is that they wanted to do in their days, in their life. And I'm standing here in front of you right now as your pastor telling you this story because there is a direct line from that guy who was sitting in the dirt eating rotten tomatoes to the one that's standing in front of you right now. Because I am your pastor from that moment and moments like it. I spent the next year from that point on doing everything I had to fight to make sure that people like him had food, had shelter, had justice. And to the best of my knowledge, that mission that I founded 12 years ago is still going strong, that we still send people over there to do that work, to make sure that those people know that there is a God above all things that love them and will care for them. And from that day when I was sitting in that corner to now is why I'm a pastor. Because I try with all my heart to follow Jesus, and I know, let me be the first to tell you that I am the sinner, the first among us. But it's that fight that makes me your pastor. It's not the 10 years of post-secondary and the letters they put behind my name and the stole that they put on me that make me your pastor. It's because I really, truly do follow Jesus. and I will fail you, and I will fail Jesus, and we will fail each other, and we will keep trying, and we will keep fighting. Because it's not about how bad we are, it's about how good our God is and what He will do. And His truth is truth. He's not being hypothetical. He's not being metaphorical. He's being actual. He really, truly, Jesus 100% means if you give everything you own away, you will find Jesus. You will be in His presence and you will know Him. So what do we do if we're not willing to do that? I don't have any blinders on my eyes. I don't expect this sermon to encourage everybody to just sell everything that they own. That would be silly. But I'm hoping to ring your bell. I'm hoping that maybe my words you're trying to shut out and you don't want to hear right now. And if that's the case, then that means that I'm hitting a nerve and that you need to listen more. Because if you don't want to hear these words, then you don't want to hear truth. These are the words of truth given to me from the Bible, from our Lord. I didn't make them up. So what do? Well, you have to be aware. You have to be aware. First of all, you have to come to church. You have to let me ring your bell. You have to let me say these things to you that maybe you don't want to hear, that maybe you're not ready for. You have to be careful because you're going to chase after stuff. I chase after stuff. And that's not going to be Jesus' way. And what will happen is we'll start making our cross that we bear more and more shallow. The cross isn't showing up on a Sunday. This is not the cross. This is just life. The problem is, what will happen is you'll start making your God smaller and smaller and smaller. And He won't be the God above all gods, the creator of heaven and earth. He'll be this thing that you think you can judge. It'll be this thing that, hey, God, where were you when the tornadoes came? Where were you when the hurricanes came? Where were you when the Ebola and the AIDS and the starvation and all these other things? And God will not be judged by us. He will judge us, and He'll say, well, where were you? Our God is bigger than us. And so we must constantly be on guard against making our God smaller and smaller and the cross smaller and smaller. And one of the ways we do that is to sacrifice, is to go out on a Saturday, when the sun is hot and it blazes and it hurts, and you go out into the world and you build a house for someone else so that you can be the blessing, so that they might see God's hand in your sweat. It looks like when someone is starving and you go to the soup kitchen with the soup that you made and you feed someone. It looks like the offering plate that comes by. The reason I had bread and water in another country is because some other church decided that my mission was God's mission and they were going to do something about it, and so they put money in that plate so that God's mission could continue. It looks like being a disciple. And if you don't know what that looks like, get in a Bible study. Get with me, come on Wednesdays, come on the mother group, get in the youth group, whatever that looks like. Take your faith for what it's worth, which is your lifeline. And recognize that all those things that you may have to sacrifice to be a disciple will bring you salvation. They will bring you satisfaction. You will grow personally and you will find your belonging and your place in the world, which is the meaning of life, which is what we're all looking for. And these things, this satisfaction, this personal growth, this belonging, these are the fruits, not possessions. This is the gift that God gives us when we do the building. And we can build towers as long as we recognize that those towers are God's and not ours.